welcome to an experiment. I'm a little nervous about this, to be honest. I've never done anything like live streaming an audiobook, but if you're coming to this from any of my non-author pages, like if you're watching this on Twitch, I apologize. This isn't a video game. This is me recording an audiobook, or at least testing recording an audiobook. I've had requests left and right to record my Sword of Dragons books as audiobooks, and I've had instances where I have, excuse me, where I've read aloud some of my new book releases, and everyone always says that they love listening to me read my books. Even people who don't like to listen to audiobooks say they enjoy it, so I thought I'd give it a shot. I've started and stopped in the past. It's stopped a lot. There's a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is I don't have a recording studio, so I'm not sure about the sound quality, and I need something to kind of keep me going forward and to not stop doing this. So I thought maybe live streaming on a regular schedule would kind of give me a kick in the butt to keep going, keep doing it. Of course, now my voice is cracking because I'm nervous. This is very different from live streaming a video game, for sure. But so I'm going to test it out on a short story I wrote in 2020 called Living Remnant. The idea was originally meant to be a novel, and it probably will become a novel someday, but I wanted to get at least the beginning story out because it really struck home for me, and I really, really wanted to write the opening story, get the characters started, set up the world, and maybe someday get it published in a science fiction magazine, something. I haven't tried yet. We'll see how things go. If I get no viewers during this, that's fine. If you're wondering why I keep looking over here, this is where I have OBS set up for the stream session. So it's also where the chat will be if you wish to comment. If I'm in the middle of reading, I will not be reading the chat or responding to chat. I don't want to stop. Sorry. God, of course my voice is going to hell right now. Sorry. Let me drink some water here. Anyway, so I'm going to simultaneously... Ooh, can I record on Streamlabs as well? Hey, it actually works. Streamlabs OBS wouldn't let me record and live stream at the same time for a long time. One of their software updates broke it, so I'm glad they finally fixed it. Hopefully I can also record using Audacity at the same time. If not, I'm going to have to stop something here. So what I'm going to do, I've used Audacity all of my previous attempts to do audiobook recordings. It works great. If I make a mistake, I will probably pause for what seems like an unusual long time. That's to put a break in the Audacity audio file. I can go back later and edit so that I know where to edit. I can just scan through it. I got to stop there, edit it, and start over again so that I don't have to try to edit while I'm in the middle of live streaming here. I'm sure you guys would get bored with that if you're not already bored with me jabbering on. So, right now all I have is the camera and the chat window up on here. If I didn't think of it until after I started recording, so let me know in chat or send me a message if you think in the future I should actually have a window up showing the text of what I'm reading. I'm not sure if that would be appropriate. I mean, as far as copyright goes, I hold the copyright to these books. They're my books, so that's not really a concern. And so, yeah. Anyway, so what I think I will do now is just kind of get right into it. Again, if I'm in the middle of recording, I will not be checking chat, but I will catch up afterwards to do this. The story is about 19 pages long, so I've been told in the past that it takes about 1 minute per page when you're doing an audiobook recording, so we could expect about a 19-minute recording here, notwithstanding mistakes and having to start paragraphs over. So let me start Audacity recording. Please don't go out on me again, voice. Looks like Audacity is recording. I see little waves indicating my voice, and I checked earlier and it seemed like it was an appropriate level. I'm going to get a little closer to the microphone, though, just to be sure that it's doing good. And again, this is a test, so if it doesn't go well, I'll know how to adjust it in the future. All right, so Living Remnant, short story by Jon Wasik. Paradise is a lie. It was a slap in... See, and I already messed up. Let's try this again. Paradise is a lie. It was a slap in the face, a splash of cold water on a burning question. Why are my feet hot? Alice shouldn't have felt heat. She shouldn't have felt sweat beating on her face or on her stomach working itself over. I'm going to start that paragraph over again. This is why I'm testing it, and I know that I should have read through the short story again before I started. I feel like I know this short story because of how many times I edited it. Okay, so. Alice shouldn't have felt heat. She shouldn't have felt sweat beating on her face or her stomach working itself over. By all accounts, she shouldn't feel anything ever again. Unless, like the stories of those who lost a limb in previous centuries, having her mind uploaded left behind false sensations, something that could be described as phantom body syndrome. Her mind swirled as if intoxicated. This wasn't right. Her palms felt sweaty. I can feel my hands? The promise of paradise was life without form, only thought and emotion. Pure, no pain, only bliss and joy. My lungs are burning! Alice tried to suck in air, even though that shouldn't have been possible, but it tasted strange, felt hot. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was all wrong, and that thought tried to force itself on... Pausing. Alice tried to suck in air, even though that shouldn't have been possible, but it tasted strange, felt hot. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was all wrong, and that thought tried to force itself to her conscious mind. Paradise is a lie. The commercials flashed through her memory amidst stars in her vision, memories from her past life. Become one with the great whole. Serve your community and earn your place in paradise, a legacy for your future generations. Paradise is a lie. Panic, burning legs, starving for oxygen. Her eyes snapped open, her hands tingled and her stomach roiled. She needed air, but she was closed in, trapped. Alice flailed her arms, but she was tightly surrounded by fabric, coarse fabric. Her hands found something rigid and relatively cool in front of her. It was a zipper. Frantically, she searched for the slider. Her limbs protested every inch of movement. She couldn't breathe. Maneuvering her hands, she found the slider above her head, but the pull tab must have been on the outside. Hey! Alice tried to call out, but her voice was hoarse, weak. Hey, I'm still here! The burning sensation at her feet grew worse, and she heard the roar of fire. Help me! No one answered. Amidst the fog of her drugged and oxygen-starved brain, she knew what was happening. The mind upload had failed. She was still in her body, and her body was trundling towards cremation. Panic grasped her innards solidly, and she thrashed her arms in the confines of her body bag. Adrenaline gave her only moments of clarity. Alice pushed her elbows to the side, clasped her hands together at an angle, and shoved down towards her chest, trying to pry the zipper teeth apart. At 40 years old, she was the strongest she'd ever been. She could do this. She had to. Her family counted on her. They expected to see her avatar on the Paradise server. The teeth popped free, right above her chest. A hole opened up. Orange light spilled in, along with blessed oxygen. She gasped in the air, made hot by the incinerator, but still cooler and cleaner than in her cocoon. Ripping her prison open, she sat up, sending her vision spinning. Wherever she was, it was lit only by a maintenance light somewhere behind her and by the fire at her feet. Her toes ached, cooking inside the bottom of the bag as a metal conveyor pushed her towards a fiery end. Still fueled by adrenaline, Alice rolled herself in the bag off to the side. She fell. She fell forever, down and down, only to land hard on her shoulder on something that rattled with a metallic clang. It seemed forever was only a few feet down, but it still hurt. Gasping for air and still riding on panic, she hastily extracted herself from her cocoon, kicking her legs wildly until she was free. On her hands and knees now, she tried to stand, but the world spun of its own accord again, listing and threatening to send her sprawling. Looking around, she realized she was on a maintenance catwalk in the innards of an automated mechanism. I'm going to actually re-record that line. Looking around, she realized she was on a maintenance catwalk in the innards of an automated mechanism, probably somewhere within the Ascension Center. The light she had noticed earlier was a maintenance lamp above a door straight ahead. She knew where she was, even if she'd performed maintenance on... She knew where she was, even if she'd never performed maintenance on this particular facility. She recognized utility pipes to her right. It reminded her of the maintenance tunnels beneath the city and inside countless buildings, though it was decidedly dirtier here. This couldn't be happening. No, 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 this can't be real. She shouldn't be here. Hello? She called out, but her voice barely worked, and her throat was parched. With as much deliberate care as she could muster, she grasped the railing to her right and hauled herself up, her legs tingling as if freshly woken. The maintenance light swirled, and her stomach threatened to empty itself of the remnants of birthday cake. Alice churned towards the conveyor, and just as her vision cleared, she froze as another bag lazily glided by, the bulk of a body giving it shape. That was when she realized just how close she had been to the incinerator. 2 seconds longer, and it would have been too late. The moment the bag entered the incinerator, flames flared all around it, and a sharp, pungent smell assaulted her. A fresh wave of nausea. She lost her cake. This wasn't paradise. She was still alive. This was all wrong. Paradise is a lie. Her family. They must be so worried about her. She pictured them gathered in front of the hollow wall at home, wondering why she hadn't come to see them yet. Jason must be worried sick, and the kids... Gritting her teeth, she coughed, but forced back anything else left in her body. Drawing up her resolve, she stepped towards the door, her feet unsteady and barely feeling the cold composite floor. She had to get out. She had to get to the Ascension tech to do it right. Re-recording that line. She had to get the Ascension tech to do it right. He must have messed up, or the technology must have malfunctioned. The system was supposed to be a fine-tuned machine, totally automated once the technician set everything up. Had the programmers not thought to put in error detection? Stop persons from being burned if the mind upload failed? As soon as she was uploaded, she resolved to converse with the artificial general intelligence and have it take points away from whomever maintained the software. Maybe the AGI could take it over. Why hadn't it done so already? When she reached the door, Alice tried to find the ID reader to open it, but there wasn't one. Nor did it open automatically for her. Her mind was still addled by the general anesthesia, so it took her far longer than it should have to realize it was an old-fashioned door. It had an actual handle on it. Disgusting, she grimaced. Grudgingly, she actually touched the door handle and pushed down on it to open the door. It gave without protest. No lock, no ID scanner, completely insecure. Did the AGI know about this? Once through the door, she wiped her hand off on her clothes, only now realizing that she was still in the same nice poly shirt and trousers that she had come to the center in. Her feet were bare, however, still aching from the searing heat and feeling increasingly tender. She found herself in a maintenance tunnel, but it was older looking than anything she had ever worked on before. Dirt and dust was everywhere, something leaked from the ceiling just ahead of her, and there wasn't an access terminal in sight. At least it's better lit, she whispered to herself, thankful for the presence of light panels evenly spaced all along the corridor. Drawing in a deep breath, she steeled herself for whatever might come ahead, and took one painful step after another towards a maintenance ladder at the other end. The corridor tilted before her, and Alice lurched sideways with it. She snagged onto one of the pipes without realizing it was supercooled, and wrenched her right hand back, the nip of cold as bad as the heat she'd just endured. Grasping her hand, she noticed for the first time a tiny open wound in the back of it, dried blood over an angry red flesh. Let me re-record that line. Grasping her hand, she noticed for the first time a tiny open wound on the back of it, dried blood over angry red flesh. Not everyone knew what that was, but since part of her job had been maintaining the ID scanners across the city, she knew. Her ID chip had been removed. Oh, shit, she groaned. Without it, there was hardly any place in the entire city she could go. Few doors would open for her, not unless they were a century old and had handles. Glooming again at the ladder, she grimaced and unsteadily stumbled to it. Looking up the access tunnel, she saw a hatch at the top, and her innards untwisted just a little. It, too, was ancient and had a handle rather than an ID scanner. Okay, I'm going to re-record that one more time. I'm sorry, guys. It, too, was an ancient... God, I keep messing this up. And this is part of the frustration I've had in recordings in the past. It, too, was ancient and had a handle rather than an ID scanner. As disgusting as touching it would be, at least she could open it. Alice grasped the ladder rungs, and then she yanked her hands back, grime and grease covering her palms. Another wave of nausea overcame her. Who in the hell maintains this place? Screwing up her courage and hoping there was nothing left in her stomach, she grasped the rungs again and pulled up. Hand over hand, foot over foot, rung after grimy, slimy, grungy rung. Nausea threatened again, and she wrapped her arm around a rung long enough to keep from falling. Bile worked its way up into the back of her throat, so she worked her tongue around to keep it at bay. Finally, she soothed her angry innards and was able to open her eyes, not having realized she had closed them until that moment. The world didn't spin anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief and then grasped the ladder with her hands, trying to ignore the grime on the crook of her elbow. I won't need my shirt in paradise, she reminded herself. Once she reached the top, Alice grasped the lever and opened the hatch. It creaked and groaned and squealed in protest, ancient hinges protesting at every centimeter. Blissfully, the room above was much more familiar, a much more advanced and, more importantly, cleaner maintenance technician's room. It was brightly lit with eggshell white walls and ceilings and a perfectly polished floor. This was so much better. Alice couldn't understand why someone who kept a neat and tidy room would allow a hatch to go so bad, but once she was out, guiltily leaving grimy footprints on the floor, she screeched the door closed and realized that it blended perfectly with the floor. The only way to open it up was to pop a hidden catch with a... re-recording. The only way to open it was to pop up hidden catches with a tool. There must be another way down there, she realized, specifically for robots to maintain the equipment. Which meant no one was supposed to go down there. Nobody living, anyway. That brought on a new kind of panic. Why was she alive? Why wasn't she in paradise? Was it really a mistake, or had she done something wrong? Had she brought shame to her family? If the AGI had found out about something from her past and all of her points were nullified, it would also mean that her family would lose points too. Was it from when she cheated on her last finals in school? Or when she fudged some maintenance records to make it look like she hadn't fallen behind? The very rules she broke to ensure her family and her family's place in paradise could have done the opposite. What if someone found her now? Is this what they really did with those who failed to meet the minimum point requirement? Burn them alive? No, she couldn't believe that. Those people were exiled outside the city, never to return, never to consume city resources again. Something else had to be going on. A mistake had to have been made. Still, a little caution couldn't hurt. Which brought her to her first obstacle, the ID scanner on the exit door. Sure, she could pound down the door until someone opened it, but she wanted to find her Ascension tech, Lennox, before anything else. Thankfully, she knew how to work an Omni tool, and there was always an extra one in a maintenance room. She found it in quick order right where it should have been, and set to work opening the panel beneath the scanner. It beeped at her when her hand passed too close to it, expecting an ID chip. A moment later, she was able to send a false signal to the reader that the door was open and needed to be closed. Since the opposite was true, and with a little more prodding with the Omni tool, the door whispered into the resources... Re-recording. Since the opposite was true, and with a little more prodding with the Omni tool, the door whispered into the recesses of the wall. Old habits kicking in, she quickly closed up the panel and was about to put the tool away, only to realize she might need it later. So she pocketed it and ducked out into the hallway moments before the tripped circuit reset and the door closed behind her. Blessed mercies, she was still in the Ascension Center, on the main floor no less, which meant that the incinerator was in the sublevels of the city. That gave her pause. While towers reigned across the city, the one above her reaching up over 200 stories, the entire base of the enclosed megacity was levels and levels of infrastructure and computer hardware for the AGI. Her job often took her below the city, so why hadn't she ever seen the incineration chambers on the Wow. I'm not used to talking this much. Her job often took her below the city, so why hadn't she ever seen the incineration chambers on the digital schematics? The hall was empty, but she quickly got her bearings and realized she wasn't far from Lennox's office. Down the hall to the left was reception, and Lennox's office was a ways to her right. By all the circuits, she had passed this very maintenance room on her way in this morning. Gritting her teeth, she headed right. Lennox was going to fix this. She would make him. Another door suddenly opened on her left. Yep, this happened last time too. Another door suddenly opened on her left, startling her. A tearful family, probably having just said goodbye to someone, came out of another Ascension Tech's office. Alice smiled awkwardly and tried to cover the removed ID chip with her other hand, but the family Wow. Okay, let me try this again. Sorry, guys. Alice smiled awkwardly and tried to cover the removed ID chip with her other hand, but the family paid little attention. Gulping, Alice wondered if the body she had watched and smelled burn had been their family member's body. The family's ascension tech, a woman in her early 30s, patted one of the teenage children on the shoulder with a gloved hand and said in a condescending tone, "Your mother will be waiting for you when you get home. Run along with your family and let her know how much you love her." Alice's jaw clenched. Her family was at home, no doubt despondent over the fact that their mother's avatar wasn't there to greet them. She had to fix this, now. The other tech glanced at Alice, but Alice walked along like she belonged there, and headed straight for Lennox's office. When she arrived at his door, she glanced back at the family, all of whom were passing through reception now, and Alice was thankful that the other tech had gone back into her office. Then Alice looked at the ID scanner and realized it wouldn't be wise to disassemble it in a public corridor like this. She'd be caught in an instant. So how would she ring the bell or let Lennox know someone wanted in? What did people do before ID chips and scanners? Having no other ideas, she slapped her palm on the door a couple of times and winced. The anesthesia from the procedure must have still been wearing off, and the physical slap sent tingles firing all along her arm. With her hands grime-encrusted, she left behind blackened handprints on the otherwise pristine door. When no one answered, she slapped the door again and again, panic-inducing a rushing sensation in her chest. What if Lennox had already left for the day? Or what if he had been fired for his failure to upload Alice, and was at the very moment being escorted out of the city, to be cast into the wilderness beyond? She heard a door somewhere down the hall open, and she feared she might be found out. Alice was past her appointment for mind upload. Would they consider her in breach and take her all... Alice was past her appointment for mind upload. Would they consider her in breach and take away all of her points now? The idea of being cast out into the wilderness soured her stomach, and whatever cake was left in her might just... The door in front of her whispered open, and a sudden... I'm making more and more mistakes as I go along. I'm sorry, guys. The door in front of her whispered open, and a stunned Lennox gaped at her, blue eyes wide with shock. Alice? Glancing to her left, she saw that the other tech had emerged from her office and was heading towards them. Fearful of shaming her family, Alice pushed past Lennox, dirtying his white lab coat in the process. "Lennox, something's wrong," she spoke, her voice a little stronger now. Realizing she was dehydrated, she glanced around the office in search of water. There was a full glass on Lennox's desk, right beside the very apparatus she had settled into before this whole nightmare began. Snatching it up, she pointed at it. "Did you drink from this yet?" The door whispered closed behind Lennox as he followed her into his office, stuttering as he went. What? No, not yet." She gulped it down, grateful his lips hadn't contaminated it yet. The cool water felt blissful on her dry tongue and throat, but when she choked on it and coughed and sputtered... Oops. The cool water felt blissful on her dry tongue and throat, but then she choked on it and coughed and sputtered. Once she recovered, she gulped down some more. Lennox's office was typical for the center, and was the third one she had ever seen, after each of her parents had been uploaded. The apparatus was essentially a bed with straps and a neural scanner at the top that would attach to one's head. The table would rotate 90 degrees so that the last thing a 40 would see is their family before the general anesthesia kicked in. She remembered how it felt, seeing her family cry tears of joy for her as she ascended to join the AGI. Paradise is a lie. You shouldn't be here," Lennox sighed, wiping his face before looking at the soiled lab coat and scowling. Finishing off the water, she stared at him. "Really? No kiddin'. What the hell happened?" Walking around her to sit at his desk, he logged into his holo terminal and shook his head. It's the cutbacks, the supply shortages." He shook his head. "We're told to use the absolute minimum anesthesia now." Alice gaped at him. "Shortages? What are you talking about? We have more than enough of everything." Lennox's jaw went taut, and he paused in his typing on the virtual interface. "No," he shook his head. "We don't." "But that's the whole point of all of this," she waved at the apparatus. Everyone knew the history. It was taught in the It was taught in their earliest years of school. The world once stood on the brink. Clean water, food, medicine. There just wasn't enough anymore for the billions of people. Hope seemed a distant luxury until the first mind upload was successful and the first true artificial general intelligence was born from it. The solution became apparent then. Power generation was the one supply shortage that had been solved back then, so a computer could be powered indefinitely. Uploaded minds could live on forever without consuming any other resources. The only limitation was hardware, hence the point system. Only those who contributed to society in their first 40 years were allowed to upload. I know, Lennox nodded. Look, I don't care about that, she shook her head. Just try again, okay? She walked over to the bed and pushed the button to lower it, not caring anymore that she was leaving behind dirt and grime everywhere. Cleanup could be Lennox's punishment for his failure. Glancing down near the foot of the bed, she noticed a semi-hidden panel in the floor. That must have been where the empty shells of bodies were sent down after the procedure. I can't. It took seconds for his words to register on her. What do you mean you can't? He looked at her with a deadpan face, but he didn't reply right away. Alice's stomach dropped down to her toes, opening a void in her chest. She walked towards him, slowly, like a frightened cat approaching something new. You must, she stated, her voice finally regaining its strength. She was leaving. You will! Lennox drew in a breath, hesitated, and then slowly shook his head. It's impossible, Alice. Impossible my ass! Strap me back into that damn thing and upload my mind now! With steel-set eyes, he again shook his head. You don't understand. It isn't that I won't, it's that I can't. Why the hell not? His eyes wavered, and his professionalism broke into regret. Turning back to his terminal, he began typing again. Something inside of her nearly snapped at his apparent decision to ignore her, and she wanted to reach across the desk through the holographic interface and strangle him. Until he stopped typing and stood up, motioning to his hollow interface. This is why. Maybe it was because his voice shook when he said that, or perhaps the deep-set, terrifyingly sad eyes, the look in him that he knew something was horrible. Let me re-record that one. The look in him that he knew something horrible. But Alice didn't want to look. She was suddenly frightened of the truth. For her family's sake, she looked anyway. She rounded his desk again and set her eyes upon the holographically projected monitor. Lennox knew she was a tech, knew that she could recognize computer program. Lennox knew she was a tech, knew that she could recognize computer code and network information. 2 lines of output drew her attention. Program Alice runnin'. God. Runnin', yeah, because that's how they talk in the future. Program Alice running. Program Alice connected. What is this? The strength in her voice had vanished again. At length he said, This is you. Color drained from her face, and the numbness... My tongue, I swear, is getting numb from reading. Sorry. Color drained from her face, and the numbness she'd felt earlier returned. Me? You see, he sighed, I can't do the procedure again because it worked the first time. She frowned but couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. The address the program was connected to. It was home. It was her family. I don't understand. Lennox paused. You understand the finer points of computers? She nodded. What happens when you move a file from one physical device to another? I mean, what is actually happening to the data? Is the data on one device literally moved? No, she shook her head. A copy of the source is recreated on the destination device, and once that's completed and the integrity verified, the source data... She paused, gulped, felt dead inside. The source data is marked as deleted. A remnant might remain on the storage device, but eventually it's zeroed out when the trim program runs. Slowly, fearfully, Alice turned her head to face him. He looked at her with haunted eyes. Exactly. He nodded towards the bed. When I set the system to upload you, it scanned your entire brain and nervous system and made a perfect virtual, software-based recreation, right down to every individual cell. We then took a snapshot of your neural activity, about 5 seconds, and ran that on the virtual model, allowing it to simulate beyond those 5 seconds. Thus, your avatar became conscious, and you were born again. I still don't understand, she shook her head. What about me? The haunted look grew deeper, and she felt chills run up and down her spine. Data remnants. A consciousness cannot be transferred, only copied. You are what's unofficially known as a living remnant. He stared into her eyes and stated, as a remnant, you are marked for deletion. She backed away as if shot, clutching her chest. And I'm still marked for deletion? He looked down, closed his eyes. There is no humane way to do so again. I was allocated only so much anesthesia. You weren't meant to wake up before... Her gaze turned hard, the shock giving way to horror. Humane way? Are you fucking kidding me? You're telling me that every single person that's ever been uploaded is really a damn copy? And you and people just like you have murdered millions. It isn't murder, Lennox glared at her, his jaw set tight. And you know exactly why we do this. It's the only way to maintain the population, to maintain resources. But I'm still alive, she clutched her chest. I'm still healthy. I'm still me. You're talking about discarding me like an overused tool. This is how it is now, he clenched his hands into fists. It's how it's been for a century. It cannot change, not now, not ever. Not if our society is to survive. He pointed at the screen. Not if your kids are going to have a good life, and their kids. A lump swelled in her throat, and she looked again at the screen. The program had been connected for nearly an hour. Talking with her children, her husband, for an hour. Someone else. Something else. Not her, but still her. Lennox's voice softened. Sorry. Lennox's voice turned soft, and he approached her carefully. What kind of world do you want them to grow up in? One in which they have their mother, their father, enough food and water? Your eldest, what was his name? Jade. Jade, he's met someone, right? Wasn't he saying they were talking about going down to the IVF center soon? Conceive their first child? She nodded absently. Alice had looked forward to meeting her first grandchild in a year or so, watch them grow up through the hollow wall, have children of their own, just like her mother had watched over her. Now she couldn't. Paradise is a lie. She was an anomaly. She was a variable the AGI hadn't accounted for in resource allocation. If Alice remained, what would happen to the perfect balance in the city? Would her children be forced to give their babies less food and water so that Alice could survive? What do I do? She looked at Lennox, her outrage reduced to a simmer. Where do I go from here? He drew in a deep breath, furrowed his brow. I've heard of this happening in other centers once or twice. Rumors mostly, nothing official for the AGI to see, but that's where the term living remnant came from. Ascension techs supposedly smuggled their remnants out of the city. Alice's eyes grew wide. Live outside? In the wilderness? You wouldn't be alone, he said. Others like you, and others who were outcasts? She turned her eyes down. Malcontents? Disruptors of society? Not like me at all. People, Lennox suggested. They're people, just like you. And as I said, some might have gone through what you're going through now. She pressed her lips into a thin line. People, just like me. Some of whom had woken up in a body bag headed for an incinerator. The morbid thought of some waking up but not escaping before they reached the flames caused her to wince and feel sick again. Her outrage drew close to boiling again. Could she do it? Leave the city, live outside those high walls, cut off from everything clean, and let her family go on living? Jason wasn't far from his own ascension. In 3 months, he would turn 40 and find himself in this exact same center, just a month after their daughter Pearl became an adult. I'm going to re-record that entire line because I messed up at the very end. Frustrations of audiobook recording. In 3 months, he would turn 40 and find himself in the exact same center just a month after their daughter Pearl became an adult. I want to see them, she suddenly stated, surprising herself. I need to see them. Can you show me the feed? Lennox hesitated. Perhaps, but only for a minute. I have another... He paused. Another patient soon, and it won't be easy to get you out of the city. He moved back to his terminal, sat down, and began keying in commands. She would have done it herself, but the hollow interface probably wouldn't accept her input without an ID chip. She was no one. Alice watched Lennox work, noting that in his log he remarked that he was only monitoring the conversation to ensure the upload had worked correctly and Alice's avatar was behaving normally. The hollow screen flashed, and she saw both sides of the conversation. Her living room projected holographically in every detail. That simple white couch and clean coffee... That simple white couch and clean coffee table. Jason wearing his favorite button-up blue shirt and black slacks, his hair styled nicer than usual, his beard trimmed perfectly. He sat in the center of the couch, with Jade on his right and Pearl on his left. And they looked happy. They sounded happy. While the perfect recreation of Alice talked with them from the other screen. Paradise is a lie. "Do you really think I can get an A on my final?" Pearl asked. "I'm still struggling with these last few lessons." Alice heard herself laugh, and at the same time as her virtual counterpart, she said, "Of course you can, dear." Alice stopped dead, but her avatar added, "And I'll be right there to help you study." It was the weirdest sensation of her life, to say it and hear it from another person with the same voice at the same time. Her smile vanished. She barely heard the rest of the conversation. Lennox turned off the feed a few minutes later. Was it an imposter? Was it really her? Was that thing still sentient? Or was everything a lie? Was Alice's mother a lie? All those weekends chatting with her mother, catching her up on Alice's latest work in the city, or Jason's latest art piece, or their children's schoolwork? Her mother was dead. Alice was supposed to be dead. And in a few months, Jason would be dead. Pain snapped her out of her thoughts, and she realized that she had clenched her hands hard enough to dig fingernails into skin. Lennox stared at her, a mix of sympathy and fear in his eyes. "They can never know," he said. "If they find out, and if the Chancellor finds out they know, or the AGI finds out, they'll be stripped of their points and ejected. They'll be a threat to our way of life." "Like I am?" she asked, glowering. "It was the mandate passed down by the architects of society," he rebuked. "It is the only way to ensure there's always enough to survive. By leaving the city, you ensure their future. Everyone's future. A future where you've murdered at 40. Let me re-record that line. A future where you're murdered at 40. She thought of Jason, of him being strapped to the same apparatus and then being discarded like useless refuse. What if he woke up before the incinerator but couldn't escape? He didn't train like she did. He wasn't as physically strong as she was. She thought of her children undergoing the same thing in 2 decades. She thought of Lennox or someone else murdering her children, and she seethed. "I can't let this go on," she spoke through... Thankfully, we're almost at the end of the story. Sorry. "I can't let this go on," she spoke through clenched teeth. Lennox closed his eyes, shook his head. "You can't do anything about it." "No?" She waved towards the rest of the city. "All I have to do is tell them." "And then what?" He shook his head, and she wanted to plant a kick square across his arrogant jaw. "You try to reveal the truth, and they'll send you and your entire family outside. Or worse, they'll kill you all." Her eyes widened. "Kill them? What would that accomplish? They wouldn't kill innocents." "I told you," he looked at her with even-set eyes. "We have a supply shortage. Not just of anesthesia, either. If your family gets even a hint that you are still alive, they would be a threat to the system. And the AGI needs hardly any motivation to rid itself of a few more mouths to feed." Her eyes widened in rage. Let me do that again. Her eyes widened in rage. "A few more mouths, you son of a bit! This is the way it is," he shouted, startling her. "I can't control it. The most I can do is work within the confines of the system and try to make things better rather than worse. Our perfect society could collapse at any moment, and you want to tear it down? To do what? Destroy 40 million lives? Bring back the chaos from before? Bring back wars, disease, poverty? Because that's what'll happen if you somehow beat every security system in this city." Alice stopped short of shouting back at him. He was right. But not about keeping the system going. Glancing back at the empty space where her family had been moments ago, she realized if she acted carelessly, her children would end up dead before 40. She couldn't allow that. There had to be a way to have her cake and eat it too. So she stared at Lennox with determined eyes and nodded. All right. Her mind swirled with possibilities. Would she ditch Lennox, stay in the city, and figure out how to stop the killings without destroying everything? No, she would be alone. After all, who would want to risk paradise if they didn't know it was a lie? But outside of the city, in that grime, mud-filled world with disease and insects and animals, there were people, just like her, some of whom had undergone the same horrifying experience. They had to be just as angry as she was. They had to be aching to change things. And most of all, she knew the innards of the city better than most. She knew how the system worked. She pressed her hand against the stolen Omni tool in her pocket, and she realized she had everything she needed to get back into the city when she was ready. She would be back. But for now... Get me out of the city, then, she nodded. Lennox looked genuinely relieved. He glanced at her sweat-encrusted dirt clothes. We need to cover you up. Then we'll take you to an exile chamber. Can you talk me through bypassing the system so it doesn't log your, Exile? She smirked. Yeah, I can do that. Good. He walked over to a set of white drawers and set into the wall, no doubt where spare clothes were kept in case a 40 ever arrived in the wrong kind of clothes, the kind that shouldn't be burned. Then we can leave all of this behind us. She wouldn't. She would never leave this behind. Alice would be back. She didn't know exactly how, didn't know what she would do when she did, but with Jason's birthday only 3 months away, that was her deadline. One way or another, she would be back. Paradise is a lie, but I will become the speaker for the truth. Okay. So, that's the end of the short story, or the beginning of the novel, if you wish. I think when I do turn this into a novel, I might change some things in that beginning section. I'm not sure. But obviously for audiobook recording, I need to practice talking. Anyone who knows me knows that I don't talk a whole lot. That's the struggle I have sometimes when I'm streaming video games. Thankfully, my wife and I, both of us being introverts, kind of help each other make up for it, and that's why we stream together a lot. But yeah, it's the weirdest sensation if you're not used to talking. My mouth, my tongue gets like numb and tired. It's weird. So yeah, I need to practice a lot. So 40 minutes. That took actually about twice as long as I expected. But thanks to the 2 viewers we have, I appreciate you following. Any suggestions about the streaming, I would appreciate it. But even if you just liked it and want more, let me know. Especially if you want more, because yeah, I don't want to do this and then have people be like, nah, this is boring. I don't want to listen to this. So, and that also, you guys are the first ones to get a look at a short story that I've been simmering on the back burner for a long time. I think I envision this novel series being a trilogy, probably. That seems to be a popular format. But I probably won't write it for a while because I've got some other books to write. More of the urban fantasy series, sci-fi, far future sci-fi in space that I want to write. And then maybe I'll get back to this trilogy around that time. I'm tired of talking though, so I'm probably going to cut the stream short now. Anyway, and it's dinner time for us. That's all I've got. So yeah, let me know what you think. Comment on any of the venues, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook. Especially Facebook would probably be the best place. Yeah. I'll have to try the audio recording later to see if it's picking up my computer's video card. The fans are a little noisier than previous video cards, but I can't complain about an RTX 3090. Alright, thanks for watching, listening. Hope you enjoy. Don't know if we'll be streaming games tonight or not. We'll let you know, but either way,